food production to consumption, particularly in launching businesses in the agri-tech and food tech sectors. From the Israeli side, we have Jack Levy. Jack is one of the godfathers of clean tech investments in Israel. For the past 15 years, he has been the founding partner of MoreVC, which was till recently named Israeli Cleantech Ventures. Jack has been responsible for many investments in the sector. Before I let each of our experts introduce themselves, let me very shortly explain why the British Embassy in Israel is leading on such an initiative. You might all know that the British government is one of the world leaders on tackling climate change and has put clean growth at the heart of its industrial strategy, setting out ambitions to reduce carbon emissions while supporting the green economy. This year's particular, 2020 and next year, 2021, will have a unique focus on this effort as the UK will be hosting COP26, United Nations Climate Change Conference, which is aimed to take place on November 2021. This forum is an embassy joint effort to support the subject and aim to increase awareness, promote collaboration between businesses from both countries, and encourage best practices on climate change. Today's discussion will focus on agri-food technologies and how they can be used to reduce the impact on climate change. And there's nothing more appropriate than to bring together experts from the UK with its extensive and advanced farming and food industries, and Israel, which is a bedrock for disruptive technologies across the board. Without further ado, I'd like to let each of our panelists introduce themselves in a couple of sentences and what basically is your experience in the agri-food tech industry. Rob, let's start with you.
Hi, Hadar. Thank you so much for the invitation today. Really excited to be here. It's an unbelievably important agenda, so thank you very much for the invitation. I'm a passionate farmer. I spent the first 30 years of my life as a farmer, but at the same time, we were particularly good at innovation to the extent we created I invented a new way of growing strawberries in my 20s, and that would have been called an Ag-Tech business then. And as an example, the strawberry industry has become virtually entirely grown with elements of what I developed back in the mid-90s. So 20 years later, I'm delighted that impact has been there. And it's a simple example of innovation and the love of farming. And that's why I think I'm here today.
Okay, great. And now, Jack, to you.
So I also want to thank you, Hadar, and it's a very, very important agenda, and I'm really happy to be here and look forward to learning from Rob and from the questions that we get. So my background here comes from an investor's perspective, as you indicated. My firm, MoreVC, which was formerly called Israeli Cleantech Ventures, we've been investing as venture capitalists in early stage Israeli technology companies since 2006, and we always have had an emphasis on sustainability. And so in the agri-tech space, we have 3 investments. One company called Groundwork BioAg, which is a company investing in soil health with mycorrhiza, which has a climate impact element to it as well. We have an investment in a data company called Prospera, also definite climate benefits from that. And then sort of a metadata company called Grow Intelligence. So that's what we've actually done on the food tech space. I've looked at a lot of things, and I'm pretty confident that in this current fund we'll make investments there, but we've yet to invest. But we are a very sustainable, focused organization. We do ESG reporting ourselves as a fund, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. There's no doubt that the food and agri space is critical to climate change, and climate change is critical to all of our future. So, mitigating climate change, I should say.
Couldn't agree more, and thank you, Jack. And welcome, both of you. Thank you so much for giving your time this afternoon. I'd like to thank those of you who submitted questions, which we've incorporated into the discussion. There will also be an opportunity to send us questions during the event via the QA box, or click on the hand button during the Q&A session at the end of the event. And we'll allow you to ask our experts, if you click on the hand, we'll allow you to ask our experts in your own words. And also following the event, if there are any remaining questions, please send them to us and we will forward them to our experts. Just giving you the frame of today's event, we're going to discuss 5 topics related to agri-food tech and climate change. I will introduce each topic and let our experts pick each other's brain. starting with farming. Farming is the bedrock of the UK's largest manufacturing sector, food and drink, which contributes over 100 billion pounds to the country's economy and is now the UK's fourth largest exporting sector. At the same time, according to UK Parliament report from 2019, agriculture is responsible for a substantial proportion of UK and global greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change, between 10 to 12%. And I'm opening the discussion with both of you. What is the main impact of farming and food on climate change, if you could provide a few points? And also, what are the main barriers for farmers and food producers to reduce their negative impact on climate change? Let's start.
Jack, do you want to go, or do you?
Well, look, I'll start with one point, because I think that I think everybody focuses on the livestock, okay? I think that's maybe the best known aspect of the connection between farming and climate change, because people are aware of livestock and methane emissions. And I think that there's a significant focus also on alternative proteins, which is not only coming from a climate change perspective, but also coming from an animal rights perspective, if you want to call it, or from an overall animal welfare perspective. I think that one of the elements that is less known, and methane, by the way, I think it's about 25 times more of a greenhouse gas trapper, in a sense, right, than CO2. So nitrous oxide, though, is 265 times more of a greenhouse gas trapper than CO2. And nitrous oxide is a problem because of over-fertilization. And so the nitrogen elements of the fertilizers that remain out there dissipate ultimately over time and release that greenhouse gas as well. And so I think that fertilizer reduction, which, or I would say more sustainable ways of achieving the necessary aims of fertilizer, but without the excess, which not only damages our water sources as well, but is also a cause of this, is a less known, and therefore I wanted to just jump in and highlight that issue that's directly connected to large-scale farming and climate change. That's just one point that I wanted to highlight.
I'd like to jump in as well and say, it's completely down the line, I've got no agenda here regards anti or pro meat. And I just, so if I say something, it's not because I'm trying to stop something happening versus another, but what I am passionate about is the facts. So when the Lancelet report came out about the impact of beef, particularly, they originally quoted 20,000 litres of water is used to create 1 kilo of beef. And the problem with that is that they included the rain falling on grass as water being used, which they've since downgraded that to between 20,000 and 5,000, which is a huge difference. And yet, in the last 2 years, that's been a vector for a huge amount of attack of the beef industry. And so that is an example of a very bad misuse of stats. If that is the way to calculate water usage, then the ocean is the bigger abuser of water on the planet, which of course it isn't. And so, and also we should think about if there's a circular usage of something, then it's not been created. That makes sense. So if we're creating grass to feed animals, and that circulates round, then that you're consuming and using rather than just producing CO2. So I'm totally with you though on the issues that we have to address, and actually a lot of these are, as I say, potentially more psychological than factual. But I'm really, I do believe that we've got some sectors of the industry as being smeared as one thing, yet that they aren't. And with the regenerative agricultural movement, organic farming, and many other much more environmentally sensitive or intelligent ways of farming, these are arguably reducing CO2, not increasing. And yet there are, of course, feedlots that are massive producers of all the gases that Jack just mentioned. So the problem is it isn't a one-size-fits-all problem, and yet some of these things are being attacked in as one. So it's important to distinguish the two. And in the UK, we've got a very good grass-fed agricultural livestock industry, and there are systems that we have banned here, for instance, that are even used in Europe, let alone in the US. So we're really proud of British food products here for lots of reasons, and that applies to chickens as well. We could talk about chickens at the time, perhaps, but chicken seems to be a very toxic area regards our trade talks at the moment. Anyway, so yes, I just made the point that we shouldn't make all casting one judgment on one food sector within agriculture. It's a blunt instrument and it's not accurate.
Hadar,
Jack, if I could jump
in. I would just, so two other things just to highlight, right? So first of all, I just have to share this image, by the way, that the one time that I was in Scotland with my family and we saw the free-ranging cows over there, and then you compare them to the ones in Israel. I mean, it's clear that there's obviously a tremendous advantage that you have, you know, in raising livestock in one place. There's the transport issue, right? Is the next point. Transport obviously contributes, and that's an overall issue in general with respect to international trade. Although there's a tremendous amount, you know, the massive ships that Maersk has put out are 45% more energy efficient, you know, than the previous ones. But our food systems, the less local they are, and they'll never be fully local. Okay, a lot of soy and corn is always going to be grown in Brazil and in the United States. There's the transport, and that causes a global warming contribution. And then of course there's deforestation, and I think that's in forest degradation, and that's probably one of the most controversial and problematic elements as well. So the final thing I would say is that where you don't have the rainfall, there is a tremendous amount of, there's this water energy nexus, okay? And so you get a greenhouse gas element when you're having to pump water and irrigate water and treat water or desalinate water in order to, you know, grow anything. So you're investing energy into that water as well. That energy, if it's from renewable sources, terrific. If it's from fossil fuel sources, that's another contributor as well.
I totally agree. And it actually brings me to the next point of our discussion. I'd like to start putting a spotlight on the technologies that tackle the effect on climate change. We've already started mentioning it when talking about working with livestock and the effect on climate change. We'll start talking on alternative meat technologies. Some of you mentioned, I think Jack, it was you, but I'll start with some facts. 77% of agricultural land in the world is aimed for growing food for meat industry, and it is responsible for 20% of the world's emissions. Like you said, methane is 25 times more dangerous than carbon dioxide. And to ignite the discussion, I'd like to ask you, Rob, how do you think farming and food giants in the UK respond to the growing demand for alternative meat products? You mentioned that it is sometimes more psychological than actually impact related, but how do you respond to that? And what are the current meat tech that are being used by this industry?
So there's amazing growth in meat-free products, and that's to be celebrated. I believe that we do need to eat less meat and more vegetables. There's an old English expression is meat and 2 veg, for which now people are saying meat and 3 veg would be enough to turn that balance right. So slightly less small meat and another portion of veg, and actually we nail it from a consumption perspective. Pure non-meat alternatives are growing incredibly, and I think there's some really good products out there. And actually, I think it should come down to what we like eating and enjoy eating. But it's not a new idea, is it? I just think but they are getting better and better. And the investment market around this has really focused the mind around great tasting products because they're seen as an asset class. My problem with that is that I don't see it as a very universal way of eating. And if we're looking at leveling up society, I think we've got to be really careful here about what specialist niche quite expensive products appear to be like to the people that are on the lowest income and where they sit. So I think we can draw on examples of brands that are moving away from meat, but still retaining their branding. I think where they're doing it well, that's very exciting. But actually, there are, as Jack mentioned, some great, essentially very high welfare meat farming going on. That is a good thing for environment. There are some really neat things going in about what we call insetting as opposed to offsetting in regards to the climate. And it's a new word to me fairly recently, but it makes a lot of sense. And most of the issues here regards carbon consumption or creation can be dealt with by insetting. So there's massive potential in reducing in the supply chain, right, starting at the farm all the way through to really get the carbon output significantly lower. So actually so people are talking a lot about certain categories of food, but in fact that we can make massive differences by many different areas that we can attack within the supply chain, and particularly on inputs used to produce crops. You mentioned early on about changes in farming and reliance on certain types of farming. We've got to get away from the addiction we have of using synthesized agricultural chemicals to maintain productivity, and move much more to the biological treatments. And the very simple thing to bear in mind here, our gut health is the same as soil health. And in fact, they're intrinsically combined. So we wouldn't want to live off vitamin pills, and we shouldn't make our fields and soil live off synthesized ag chemicals. And that's pretty much what's happened in the last 70 years. And yet the soil is thousands of years old. So what we need to do is stop what's been happening and reverse that and think more about biological treatments. And this will help right across the board by, one, transforming it from a producer of CO2 to potentially being a consumer of CO2, as in farming and the supply chain.
And Jack, what type of solutions exist in Israel around meat alternative?
So I'll address that, and then remind me later, Rob, I want to come back and talk a little bit about mycorrhiza based on your last comment. So we have in Israel definitely some really interesting early stage companies, some of which have already raised, up 10+ million or so of capital, some of them, and others that are just in their first rounds. In the cultured meat segment, okay, so there's a Future Meat, which is Professor Nachmias and Ron Kshuk out of Hebrew University, and then there's Aleph Farms, which is out of the Technion with Didier as the CEO. It's super early stage stuff, but you got, I forgot, one of them I think has Tyson Foods as a early stage first investor in the company, right? So these are great scientific academics who really, I think one of them has a background of having worked on scaffolding for organ reproduction outside the body. And so to some extent that concept made sense to do the kind of scaffolding around getting this cell-based structure to work so that you can create your steak in a lab, right? Memphis Meats is, I think, the global leader in this. It's raised a tremendous amount of money, US-based company. This is very sort of futuristic stuff, but it is extraordinarily exciting and is attracting investment capital. In addition to that, we have, Israel's an interesting place in that there is, we are a leader in printing technology. HP and Indigo, sort of some of the biggest printing companies have always had core tech centers here, in 3D printing as well. Stratasys is based on Object, which came from Israel. So this combination of the printing and the food tech have actually come together, and particularly in the Rehovot area, that's the center of Israel. Nothing's that far away from each other anyway, which is kind of what makes the innovation. But that's an important point to make, by the way. That's what makes innovation so exciting over here, because your farm is like literally 10 miles away from your, the core center of the computer science research at all the universities. It's just, we're all on top of each other here in such a small country. And so, two children from the same family, one's an agronomist and one's a computer scientist, they start talking and they form things together. So in Rehovot, you have this kind of juxtaposition of 3D printing technology and food tech. And so companies like Redefine Meat and Savor Eat are also, some of them have some academic roots, some of them are pure entrepreneurs, are out there looking to print the best quality steak that you'll have. And so each of these, obviously, I do think that Rob's point, though, is very important. These are, you know, niche kinds of initial opportunities. Now, niche in a food tech is enormous, so I'm not mitigating the opportunity that they have. I think that Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat are also niche, okay? But they're enormous and incredible companies from an investor's perspective. They were amazing successes. But when we're thinking about how we're feeding the 9 billion people, how we're providing protein, how we're doing that all in a much more sustainable way, I think that these are all part of the solutions, but we have to think extraordinarily broadly, and we have to take our existing mass agricultural structure and make it more sustainable, not just sort of say, oh, we're going to replace the livestock with things in the lab. That, sure, that can be a part of it. Who knows? Maybe 50 years from now, we'll have made a major dent in it. But we need to make a dent in climate change in the next 10 years. And so in order to do that, we have to work on improving some of the broader based things that we have.
Well, speaking as a Rehobotian, I couldn't agree more. And all
there
for
you go. It's awesome. It's fabulous to visit these companies as well. You don't know if you're walking into a kitchen or you're walking into a lab or you're walking into a printing shop. You know, it's fantastic. They're great companies. And by the way, one of them has a UK-based investor in it as well. So that's a nice connection.
Good to know. I'd like to continue to the second tech spotlight for today. Another phenomenon with a significant impact on climate change is food waste. A few figures: it is estimated that food waste we produce is responsible for 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emission. And in the UK alone, the volume of food waste generated in the retail supply chain, the hospitality sector, and in home stood on almost 10 million tons in 2018, associated with more than 25 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Let's first start with how each of you actually define and what do you consider to be food waste. And also, it'll be great to hear from both of you what UK or Israeli farmers and food producers are doing in order to reduce food waste. And Jack, of course, if you know of any interesting tech from Israel that is dealing with it.
Sure, I can look. I think food waste, very broadly, obviously, you know, it starts on crops in the farm, okay, and then it moves down at the packing house, and then ultimately in the distribution centers and the stores, and then ultimately at the table as well. I've seen statistics about what percentage gets wasted where. I do remember being particularly shocked at what the last percentage is at the table, although maybe I shouldn't be because I'm the one that does that, you know, on a regular basis. We try not to. Just on that one, there is a cool Israeli technology company that, you know, by the way, if I'm ever involved in one, I'll highlight it. So if I don't say that, then I'm not involved with it. So I'm not pitching anything. Silo is an interesting company, which is doing sort of vacuum packed Tupperware and therefore preserving the food longer in your fridge. And you say, hey, Alexa, you know, when did I last open up, you know, the potatoes? And Alexa will tell you. It's futuristic. It's very neat. There's other, if you go further, you know, I always forget if it's upstream or downstream, right? So I think further upstream, there's a company called Clara Fruit, which is, I think, very promising in that they're doing sort of fast-paced optical inspection at the packing houses and therefore able to do better sorting, and maybe they can sort between the different classes of fruit, make sure that they get to the right places where they're really going to be used as opposed to be rejected after they've been shipped because, oh, you sent something that you thought was going to be quality enough for actual, you know, sort of sitting at their high-end you know, Tesco, and it should have been sent to the juicing side, right? So that particular apple or what have you. Rapid, you know, rapid sorting and that kind of stuff. There are plenty of other, there's a company called Wasteless also, which I think is an interesting one, which is doing a sort of real-time changing on the pricing tags in the grocery store. And they're piloting, I know in Europe, I don't know if they have anything in the UK, but the idea here is to sort of affect our buying pattern by basically kind of lowering the price as the food is potentially going to spoil and therefore increasing consumption reducing waste. So those are just a few examples of tech companies that I've seen here addressing those challenges.
That's, I mean, I think to my mind, as a farmer, the level of waste to be really low. And I'm pretty certain that's the case across the industry, particularly in produce and meat. But our planning call for this, I explained that produce that is, say, carrots that are damaged, are fed to livestock, are still calculated as waste, even though they're being used for a different food source. So without developing the persona of the stat critic today, be careful of some of these stats. The facts are most of this waste is in the household, or certainly at the retail store to the household, exactly as Jack mentioned. And actually, carrot and stick, forgive the extended metaphor, is what we need here. And so there are some very smart systems where people are charged for household waste by way of reducing the more you have, the more you're charged. And those are intelligent bins. Those are, I think, have had massive impact in reducing people's behavior. So there's a consumer change. Bread by far is the biggest number and all that in consumer waste. So how do we buy? Can we buy things differently? I think what we're seeing is some really clever payment and marketplace platforms that are enabling, like Fruit Pro, or finding far smarter ways to connect consumers and producers together to avoid waste. I'm aware of a company of Clarafruit. I think they're great. There's an American company called IntelliLab, who I believe are further on than Clarafruit, and they're looking at even being able to forecast the crop, say with strawberries, aligning that with an intelligent AI system to track the produce through the chain to manage wastage, but also manage understanding what's happening at a supply side, because within the supply and ABAC Harvest did this with apple forecasting as well, and there's going to be many, many others. So the more we know about the crop that's coming, to then let the marketing systems or even digital marketplaces then to start to frame the product in the right pricing structure in the retail space will fit with the need more at the consumer level. So aligning production and consumption digitally is going to be really exciting. I love the dynamic pricing tool that you mentioned, Jack. I think that makes so much sense. It doesn't take much to predict what's going on. There's a company here, that's a British company, and they've got an intelligent shelf life label that changes based on the temperature, not the actual predicted date for shelf life on milk. And that's called Mimica. And that was genius. That was invented by somebody who was working as doing voluntary work, and this is where innovation comes from, for a old people's home where there was somebody that was blind, and this blind lady asked her to make this a cup of tea for this person, and she smelt the milk to check it, and the milk was fine, and then she looked at the label and realized the shelf life was miles out of date, but the milk was fine because it smelt okay. And what she realized is that this lady couldn't read the dates, so therefore it was okay and carry on using it. So she developed essentially what is Braille, but anybody can feel it, and it responds to temperature over its entire lifetime rather than the date, which is pretty much 70% out. So there's huge issues around use by or best befores, and which I think the wonderful tech that we just talked about can really start to address it at a consumer level. So the carrot is a better intelligence around what's coming on the shelf, but equally the stick is charging for it when it's been created. So stop the cause of it is key. But from a farming sector, we don't like wasting anything. And most of my friends that are farmers, they find it a bit difficult to find this wonky fruit that they have to generate. It's for some of these new wonky brands, not perfect brands, and it costs them more to do it than it's worth. So there's a bit of a reality check as well within the supply chain, but at the consumer level, downstream, there's a massive opportunity there from a tech brand, technology basis to really fix this. I think we can make a big impact very quickly if we really now use COVID as a now teched up world to help us with that.
Hadar, I just wanted to jump in because
time. We need to hurry up to finish the other topics.
Okay, well, just briefly, because I attended a conference some years back, also focusing on the question of food waste in the developing world, and so there you have to understand that there we just need certain existing technologies to penetrate, sort of like cold storage chains and other
fridge.
things like that. Yeah, exactly, right. So and that was like the issue there. And then, you know, I can tell you, by the way, that if you really want to save food waste at home, all you need are a bunch of, you know, late teenage, early 20s soldier boys, and you will have no food waste whatsoever. That
No, I agree. Okay, next.
I'd like to continue to our last tech focus for today, and what I personally find to be a very interesting and fascinating topic, which is big data. There is a huge amount of data generated from the lab, from the farm to the retailer, and it has the potential to drive innovation throughout the agri-tech sector, and of course the food tech sector. We have smart sensors and devices that produce large amounts of data, which can help us to improve our decision-making process. So both of you, let's start with Rob. How do you think big data in the agri-food tech industry can help us even better to tackle climate change? And Jack, how do you see big data technologies disrupt the farm-to-table industry?
I'll give an example of a business that I'm working with, so declaring interest in this, called Computeronics. It's a German company, and they have developed a big data system, so totally machine learning AI around plant breeding. And they've reduced the plant breeding time frame by 75%. So 3/4. In other words, it takes, so on a 7-year plant breeding cycle, that is around about 18 months to 2 years now, through their AI big data system. To me, that's just brilliant. That is exactly what we need. And one of their secret, one of the key, and crucial to their secret sauce, if you like, is that they factor in climate change relevance to that plant that they're helping breed. So, and they've got proven data now. They're working in 3 different continents. And the one they can talk about is some rice work they did in Indonesia, where they did exactly this, and they could basically fast track. So it's thinking like amazing masses and masses of data needed to do that. And I think something like 40 or 50 vector points to analyze. It's totally impossible for humans to do this. And where we've got that, there's huge savings can be made, cash savings. Imagine how efficient it is to be able to create a market relevant variety that, but the plant breeder is using only a fraction of the space they need to produce it. That's got financial savings all over it, but also huge impact on climate change, because you can get something ready now as opposed to waiting years and years and years for it to try and get it out commercially. So I think that's an example of good examples of it. And I can see this, and mentioning the camera learning system for produce, the previous question, that is another example of getting humans out of the way and using big data to fix problems in a very significant way that will help lower costs, make food more affordable, while also improving the environment. However, there are many big data claims that are, I would say, data in isolation. And the biggest thing that's holding back this industry is lack of integration between data creators. And what I hear from farmers at the coalface, or farmers with their Wellington boots on, is that they don't get it. A lot of this stuff doesn't talk to each other. They can't make it useful. So too many things look pretty and quite sexy and have a nice user interface, but actually it doesn't turn into a valuable decision to them. Now, I know that there are businesses that are addressing this, and actually data integration brands is a big opportunity in the market. Just a tick out there if you're thinking about creating a business. There's a lot of room in that to do more in. But if you think, I always think the inspiration for business is fintech, and Britain is absolutely leading the world in fintech, and inspiration from that into ag-tech. Now in fintech, the secret has been it's being very good at one specific thing and then allowing integrations with many other things that are totally not you. And that's the same what we need to do more of now in ag-tech with big data. So be really good at one thing and then enable API or whatever the Zapier integration tool is to then create a multiple connections to then have something that is enormous data that becomes really useful to the farm.
It's also a very important part for tips coming up, tips to our startup.
Yeah.
Jack, anything you'd
So-
like to add?
Yeah, so I think, look, Israel here definitely has a lot to contribute. There are some amazing startups. The question of, getting to big data starts with low-cost sensors and the ability to gather the data, amazing computer vision talent. A lot of these things, certainly, some of them are, have been done quite well for military applications. And I can't tell you how many people I know, like, that grew up on a kibbutz, sort of served in these military R&D units, and now have started agri-tech related companies, and some of them are succeeding very, very well. You have one, by the way, which just announced a significant raise yesterday. That's Ag-Foodtech, which is doing really tree by tree sensors. They've been in the market for years, by the way. And then you have a company, and they just raised $25 million yesterday. You've got companies like, that's Ag-Foodtech, right? And there's C-Tree, which is doing significant orchard monitoring. So there's orchards. You have a company like Tyrannus, which is doing drone-based and flyover-based imaging, high-quality imaging. And then the one that I'm invested in, Prospera. And what I like about the approach that Prospera has taken is that they really understand that distribution is critical in this business. And I think what Rob said is 100% right. It's like, Rob, by the way, is a farmer himself, and he knows farmers. For me, I follow farmers on Twitter. That's how I stay in touch with this market. And I can't tell you how many of them sit there and say, if I'm going to have to pay another couple bucks per acre for data that doesn't give me the right insight, forget about it, right? They've been inundated with these technologies for a long time, but the ones that do give them the actionable insights are fantastic. And the ones that, and the people that they trust are often the people that they've been working with for a long time. And so Prospera has done a very good job of working with the biggest irrigation manufacturer, Valley. And they're basically, giving farmers incredible insights. And ultimately the vision is that these pivot irrigation systems are there. They're in the field. They can see things before the farmer can all the time. They're, constantly moving around. And now, by the way, in the greenhouse side, Prospera has partnered with Bayer to do that. So I think it's a combination of getting the sensors cheap, but getting them out there in a massive scale, and getting the farmer to work with the trusted agronomist, because the whole business model of a lot of these ag retail companies, the ones that provide the inputs, is that they provide the agronomy services along with it. And that's who the farmer's really talking to for the expertise. So it's not just about collecting data, it's about getting it to the farmer where they need it and through the channels that they already trust. That's, I think, critical for any startup people out there listening and thinking about the go-to-market elements of this.
Just one quick one to support that, if that's okay. The way that big data will interact.
Half a minute.
Okay. The way that big data will integrate with new marketplaces to break through. So there's too many people, too many hands in the way, or taking in the existing, if you like, analog farming, where people have been advised to buy something and they're getting a kickback on that market for the product they're selling to the farm. All the potential to liberate these marketplaces to create much freer, transparent trading, backstream to the farm and downstream to the consumer. These digital marketplaces that fed by the big data is a really interesting area, and I'm really excited about the businesses that I'm working with, where big data is going to enable that, because that will make the difference to substantially change the cost of farmers without them having to give away money. It's about that is a liberating moment.
Okay, great points, both of you. I'd like to, we finished our tech topics, and I'd like to move on. As many of our audience today are agri-food-tech startups or investors or associated with the sector, I'm sure that they want to hear how we can tackle, how we can take agri-food-tech startups into the next level. I'd like to ask both of you, considering your vast investment experience, as funding is one of the main obstacles for any startup, and even more so for agri-food-tech ones, what can you advise early stage startups when trying to tap into private or public funding? And if we have time, a little bit about what you think are the trends of the future in agri-tech.
Sure. So I'm happy. So first of all, I think it's never been a better time to be starting up a company in these areas, in agri-tech and in food tech. I actually came across, I was just looking to prepare for this, and I had this oh yeah, I guess you won't be able to see it, but I have this this report, which I had no idea was from December 2009, called Preparing for a Second Green Revolution, right? I was just looking through some of my old files here. And you look at the number of investors and the number of agri-tech and food tech companies, and it's a pittance compared to what you have today. So this area is, you know, the Beyond Meat IPO and the Climate Corp sale to Monsanto have definitely driven investor appetite in a major way. Yes, you know, investors are driven by greed and fear, right? So that's what they say. You know, some of us are also driven by a desire to make long-term impact as well. But I think that it's hard to want to try to make long-term impact if you're not going to be able to make good long-term returns as well. And I think that for some of us who were the vanguards in these area, you know, 10, 12, 15 years ago, we were lonely and we weren't finding the investors that are all only profit driven kind of joining us. That's changed. That's absolutely changed. You look at the names on the cap tables of these companies, and I'm co-invested with Bessemer in Prospera. Bessemer is one of the best venture capital funds in the world, and Agri-Tech for them is like anything else. They'll compare it against the latest cloud technology company, and they're only going to invest in what they think is best. The company that led the round yesterday in Feedtech, and I really salute those guys because I met them so many years ago, was out of Thomas H. Lee Partners, like a really big private equity fund. And so I think there's never been a better time. Now, obviously, everything's always hard. Every startup is hard. You really have to come at it with a passion and with a vision. And sometimes the best and the biggest companies really start with completely contrarian ideas, or ideas that haven't yet gotten the investor sentiment, and they get to ride that wave up. And as everybody kind of, you know, piles on. So I don't know, you know, in the Q&A, if there are more specific questions, I'm happy to address them. But for now, I really do want to encourage people by letting them know that not only here in Israel, but globally, this is a phenomenal time from the investor sentiment perspective. And ag and food are not going away. There's COVID opportunities and there's COVID threats, but there isn't a COVID problem, right? Okay, so that's
what I always look at it from a consumer perspective. I mean, you know, it's eating is an agricultural act. It's Wendell Berry, great philosopher and a farmer from the US, who I adore his thinking. I'm driven by that and less about the VCs that coalesce around a certain category. So home delivery has been a very big sink in food tech, and there's been some quite sort of questionable levels of funding around that. So there does seem to be with funding does tend to be they work together a little bit like migrating birds, dare I say. So forgive me, respect to the VCs.
People prefer to call us sheep, and we understand it. It's okay.
Migrating birds perhaps is more beautiful or elegant, but so in and out, you know, seasonally. But I think we're going to see some really interesting space around this ag tech. COVID has taken what was probably going to take 10 years and compress it into 2. And arguably less. There were technologies I saw last year that where nobody was buying, and then suddenly they were buying it for the retail industry regards digitalization. So you're ordering from your table, paying from your table, it makes complete sense. But without COVID, now it's done as a safety measure, and yet it's done, and now they're doing it because of that reason. But in fact, when you think about the impact of knowing what that person's eating and digitally recording that, and think about the intelligence you're learning from it, is very powerful. So the new marketplaces that will exist around data are really exciting. And I think that where I see startups go wrong, what I meet, and we meet a lot, is that they try and be too much to everybody. And I'd much rather than be if you want to take an analogy, they try and be, and forgive the reference to the Bible, but well, not Bible, biblical times, but David and Goliath. They try and be big little Goliaths when they should be very good Davids. And so I want this agility, the innovation, the smartness to be much more apparent. So think big, but have a very single purpose, and be able to act quickly and get that product out quickly. So the expression of minimum viable product is acutely important. So I think deep tech as an investment category has been the most disillusioned area, because it basically means you're not going to make any money even for a long time. And I think some people in ag tech have thought well, that's fine, we can do that. No, what we want is a business that can make money in it quickly, and it doesn't matter if it's small numbers. What matters is that it's showing proof of concept quickly and has a really clear single purpose it's solving. And that's what I've seen is a good investment. When businesses try and be too big too quickly and trying to do too many things at once, clearly they'll fail, and that's been a problem for ag tech. So and let's call it Agri-Foodtech if you like, because it's all interconnected from production to consumption. That's a key tip on getting funding, is to not try and be too big too quickly. Start small with a single purpose and be very clear about it, who you're targeting and how quickly you'll get to them, to learn from the marketplace. No business plan survives a customer contact, and let's get that customer contact as quickly as possible. So lean startup thinking. Read the book, Eric Ries. He thought of this for tech, but it applies to ag tech, applies to any business. That's my view. And I think we'll start to see a lot more interest on marketplaces that enable the great innovations around data collection. Those will be some really exciting places that will transform the economics and the environment issues that we're trying to address.
I just wanted to come back to one thing also, because Rob had mentioned it earlier. I think that one area which in ag tech has gotten less attention is the biological space. There was a rash of acquisitions sort of like 6 or 7 years ago, and that brought some, and that's when we invested in Groundwork BioAg, and we're thrilled with the progress of that company on the mycorrhiza side, and it's got climate benefits, but it's also got soil health benefits. But I know for a fact that the big ag, there's been a lot of consolidation at the big agrochemical companies, and they all view biologicals as a significant part of their future, and it needs to be, because the chemicals are meeting up with massive resistance, and this isn't necessarily as much only climate change. This is a environmental health of the soil problem. So I think that we're going to see increasing investor attention shift to that as time goes forward as well. So.
I'm working with a business that's developed a way to measure biologicals in soil and do it live in the field, and it's the first time it's been up to done. So it's a great area. Sorry, I'll stop talking.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, we want to take questions. Yeah.
Time for questions. Although it was truly fascinating. I'm running to open my own Agri-Tech startup as we speak. I'm opening it to the audience. If anyone wants to ask a question in their own voice, just click on the hand button at the bottom of the screen, and we will allow you to speak. And if not, you can submit your questions in the Q&A box or chat box. But in the meantime, I have pre-submitted questions that were sent to me before the event. One question is, if you know, this is relevant to both of you, if you are aware of any activities in regards to ag tech aiming at impacting the developing world.
Ag tech in the developing world. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's one very interesting company that I'm monitoring called OCO, which is actually primarily a sort of a micro insurance company. The guy's based here in Israel, but he's really doing crop insurance all in the developing world, mobile phone based, and allowing that. Without insurance, it's hard to take risks. The farmers take risks, and bringing that into areas where it has not been sold that way. And he has massive insurance partners, Allianz and others, that are working together with him, and all the massive mobile phone developers. So there's amazing business model leapfrogging type innovation that you can bring to the developing countries where you haven't seen it before, similar to what we saw like in off-grid renewables technologies. We have one investment like that in developing countries as well. So that's just one example. OCO is the name of the company, with a phenomenal founder here, Simon.
It's interesting. My team, we're working with a company called Ag-Unity, and they're based in developing countries, and they give a mobile phone. They've actually got an iPhone 7 equivalent. It's not an iPhone 7. It costs them $50 to make it, and they give that to the farmers, and they trade using a QR code system. And then they can buy things from it, but it's all about micropayments using their phone system, and they're just about to be part of a large contract with fair trade, in which they'll enable traceability as well with the actual right through the system. So it's a blockchain, it's not blockchain, but it enables a digital ledger right through from production to throughout to the wholesale. But that's, and they're giving the phones to developing countries and people in villages, and so providing they can get some power on the phone and they can work. And that again is used as a way to develop credibility around financial services. If you think that in developing countries we have access to borrowing money in a way that many people in villages don't have access to borrow money because they haven't got that financial track record. So having for the first time a way to digitally capture that then gives them credibility to then borrow. So they can have micro sales and micro borrowing to actually get them through. And for instance, if they have a bad day or bad week on the harvest, they probably can see it through rather than be in big trouble. So that is transformative. Ag-Unity is that company who our team are working with through our leadership hub, which is where we coalesce brands together to try and help them around the world.
Okay, thank you. I have another question from the audience. What are the future trends in high resolution, data-driven ESG reporting regulations and standards? Is this topic familiar to you?
Yeah, there was a lot there. Just say the latest trends in high
resolution, data-driven ESG reporting regulations and standards.
I don't know if I'm on top of that enough. I saw a recent report talking about the look, well, first of all, the biggest trend about ESG reporting is that it's just becoming more prevalent, right? I mean, I think, again, the Larry Fink, I think is his name, right, from BlackRock. I mean, his letter a year and a half or so ago sort of like took one of the biggest, I think, institutional investors in the world and sort of like put ESG sort of, you know, firmly in the it's no longer a marginal element or trend or anything like that. It's a stakeholder is, it really changes the way I started my career as a corporate lawyer. It really changes the way that I think the whole ecosystem is thinking about shareholders and stakeholders. I follow Marty Lipton, I think he's still alive. He's one of the most famous corporate lawyers in the United States, and I follow their literature just because it helps kind of think about trends of governance and the like. And you see, I saw a report where they said that they expect class action lawsuits against companies around their failure to meet their climate targets, right? So I think that's, I don't want to take it from the negative perspective, but that's a positive element. In other words, if they, just like they should be liable and accountable to some extent on their profitability goals and on their revenue goals and what have you, having accountability associated with your climate related goals and your ESG goals is, I think, critical. I used to say about Unilever that I thought that they were the first company I met that you probably could get fired for meeting your sustainability goals as quickly as you could get fired for meeting your top line or bottom line goals. I always had thought that they had that core element to their corporate culture. So I don't know if I have a better answer in terms of specific line items or you know, standardizing. I know there's a lot of challenges associated with reporting ESG and standardizing and coming up with right metrics that matter and that can be tracked across different things. But I think a whole industry is beginning to work on that. The biggest trend I would say is that it's just becoming more prevalent and more important.
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on around satellite technology and hyper resolution. But you just need to be careful of some of this stuff. Again, is it as accurate as it portrays itself to be? But I think there is some really exciting space around measuring things from the satellite. Obviously, we need a cloudless day, which isn't today in London, and other factors like there isn't a crop growing over it. But that's for measuring, I guess, the environmental impact of certain farming practices. But other ESG areas, I think there's a lot of things we've already been talking about that can help people get it right digitally at the same time. So digital recording systems that make sure that we are tracking things, but also we can stop things that are the lying or breaches of within the supply chain that exist today to fix that. So it's a more secure way of then recording impact from environmental and society perspective. So that opportunity to underpin that is exciting.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving to the next question. First, the one who questioned want to thank both of you. They're interested to know more about your practices around impact measurements. It's clear that the solutions and technologies you mentioned are generating social and environmental impact, but curious to know if you have practiced or seen the importance of managing that impact and adding transparency around achievements of KPIs.
So it's similar to the previous question, at least the way I understood it. I've seen two endeavors here by Israeli companies, startup companies, to try to standardize, and I can't remember the name of the first one. It got sold actually to a consulting firm, sort of Israeli founder, although based near MIT in the United States. And then another one that maybe Noam Gressel is involved with, to try to do just that. In other words, the first one was trying to say, look, we all talk, they were trying to create a language that's more translatable, because are you talking about a ton of carbon, or are you talking about, and they basically had this vision of like, well, everybody understands energy units in terms of gasoline, and I think that and miles per gallon, effectively, that's the most, their thesis, like that's the most inherently translatable thing for the consumer. So can we try to standardize a lot of these things into that? And I think these things help, because to a large extent, you're talking about, kilowatts or cubic meters of water or metric tons of carbon, and people often get lost between the measurements and the like. So I applaud these efforts. We didn't invest in those specifically, but I do think that some kind of additional sustainability reporting standardization, and maybe even ultimately it's going to come in the public company context from the SECs or the the financial regulators of the world. I think that that's ultimately, they're the ones that kind of or like, just like there's gap accounting, I do ultimately think that you'll start to see developments of more standards around sustainability reports. But yeah, it is a challenge. It's hard to measure it across different companies, but that's you can't translate absolutely everything though into certain numbers the way that you can in with cash, right, or financial accounting. So it's not simple.
I'll try and be quick. I think the opportunity for micro businesses to benefit from new technologies, to enable them to be more of them, particularly in developing countries, but also in any country. So enabling farming at a much smaller level. So it's almost as the new big is being small, and that is really interesting, whether it's in a city, so small production sold locally, and it sounds like a niche again, but it isn't. And when you start to build it up across a wide network of people benefiting from the technological information that you can get from that, be it actually how to grow something or how to sell it. So the opportunity around that is really, really powerful, and I think that that will help then create a traceable system that will help be more transparent, which will also be a very good brand to believe in as a consumer, but also a great way to make sure that we are achieving the societal goals that we talk about. It's now time to stop talking about and start doing it. And I think that will be really a really big deal for farming. We lost you briefly, Hadar. Yeah.
Yes, apparently Rehovot has a power outage at the moment.
Oh, wow.
Thank God for batteries and my mobile and hot.
Wow, that was pretty impressive turnaround.
That was a very quick response time.
Mm.
We are the tech hub, this is what we do.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did you finish answering the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to wrap up, if that's okay. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you find our discussion interesting and eye-opening. Thank you again to our fabulous experts, Rob and Jack, for the amazing insights you've brought to this virtual table. We hope to see you in our future UK-Israel Climate Change Innovation Forum. Until then, we wish you Shana Tova, for a good year, and with lots of health and prosperity, and good evening to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you from me as well. It was a pleasure to meet you, Rob. Thanks, Hadar.
Thanks, Jack. Good to meet you too.
Bye, everyone.